An arrogant HOA board stole my roof to install solar panels assuming I couldn't do a thing about it. They were dead wrong. I let them build the entire grid, waited for the electricity credits to pile up, and then hit them with a double lawsuit. Not only did the judge force them to refund the entire neighborhood's fees, but a second lawsuit stripped them of every single profit. Here is how I made my power-tripping HOA pay for my electricity. Forever. My name's Marcus Holt, and I work from home as a software consultant, which means I notice when strangers are drilling into my property at 7 a.m. I walked outside to find a utility van parked in my driveway with men unloading solar panels from a flatbed truck. I stood there for a second, confused, then called up to the nearest guy. "Excuse me, what are you doing?" He glanced down, adjusting his safety goggles. "Solar installation. Should be done by end of day." I blinked. "I didn't order solar panels." He pulled a work order from his pocket and squinted at it. "This is 428 Maple Ridge Drive, right?" "That's my address," I said, "but I never authorized this." He shrugged. "We just go where the paperwork says. You'll have to talk to the HOA." That's when my stomach dropped. I walked back inside, grabbed my phone, and called the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association office. A woman named Diane answered on the third ring. "Maple Ridge HOA, how can I help you?" "There are men installing solar panels on my roof right now," I said. "I didn't approve this." "Oh," she said brightly, "that's part of the new Community Energy Initiative. The board voted on it last quarter." I sat down at my kitchen table. "I never got a notice about this." "It was in the monthly newsletter," she said. "All homeowners were informed." "I don't get a newsletter." "Well, it's emailed to the address on file." I checked my email, nothing. I asked her to confirm the address they had. She read it back to me, and sure enough, it was wrong. One digit off in the street number. "So you've been sending newsletters to someone else's inbox for how long?" She paused. "I'm not sure, but that doesn't change the fact that the board approved the solar initiative. It's part of the updated community charter." "What charter?" "The revised HOA guidelines. All homeowners are required to participate in energy sustainability measures. The cost is covered by a special assessment." I felt my jaw tight. "How much?" $4,200 per household, spread over 24 months. "It'll be added to your quarterly dues." I didn't agree to this. The board has the authority to implement infrastructure improvements under Section 12 of the governing documents. I hung up and immediately called my lawyer, an old college buddy named Seth who specialized in property law. He listened to the whole story without interrupting, then let out a low whistle. "They can't just install infrastructure on your property without explicit consent," he said. "Even if the HOA has broad authority, this crosses into property rights." "What do I do?" "First, stop the installation. Tell them you're revoking access. Then get me copies of the HOA docs, the work order, and anything showing they didn't properly notify you." I went back outside and told the crew to stop. The foreman wasn't happy, but he made a call, and within 20 minutes they packed up and left. By noon, I had an email from the HOA's property manager, a man named Gerald Finch. It was curt and condescending. "Mr. Holt, your refusal to comply with the Community Energy Initiative is in direct violation of HOA policy. Failure to allow installation will result in fines of $150 per day until compliance is achieved." I forwarded it to Seth. His response was immediate: "Let them try. Meanwhile, don't let anyone on your property." That evening, I went through my HOA documents. Buried in the fine print of the updated charter, which I'd never been sent a physical copy of, was a clause about mandatory participation in sustainability projects. But it also stated that any structural modification required written homeowner approval. The solar panels were bolted to my roof. That was structural. The next morning, I received a certified letter. It was a notice of violation and a demand to allow installation within 72 hours or face escalating fines and potential legal action. I didn't respond. Instead, I did some digging. I started with the solar company, a firm called Brightline Energy Solutions. I called their main office and asked to speak to someone about the Maple Ridge contract. A sales rep named Colin picked up. I explained that panels had been installed or attempted to be installed on my property without my consent. Pulled up the account. According to our records, the contract was signed by the HOA president, Angela Ruiz. She authorized installations on all properties within the community. Did she provide proof of homeowner consent? There was a pause. That's typically handled on the HOA side. We were told all residents were notified and agreed. They weren't, I said, at least not me, and I'm not the only one. He sounded genuinely concerned. If that's the case, you should escalate it with the HOA. We fulfilled our contract based on what we were told. I thanked him and hung up, then started knocking on doors. My neighbors, the Chens, answered first. They had panels on their roof already installed. "Did you agree to this?" I asked. Mrs. Chen shook her head. "We got a letter saying it was mandatory. We didn't think we had a choice." "Did you sign anything?" "No," she said. "They just showed up one day, 3 more houses down, same story. No one had signed consent forms." Everyone had been told it was mandatory and no one had questioned it. By the end of the day, I had statements from 9 households. Seth filed an emergency injunction to halt further installations and requested a full audit of the HOA's contracting process. The judge granted a temporary halt pending a hearing. That's when Angela Ruiz showed up at my door. She was in her mid-50s, wearing a blazer and heels with a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "You're making this much harder than it needs to be," she said. "This is a community investment. Everyone benefits. Not if I didn't agree to it, I said. The board voted. That's how HOAs work. The board doesn't get to modify my property without my written consent. That's how property law works. She smiled tightly. You're going to lose this fight, Mr. Holt. And when you do, you'll owe back fines, legal fees, and the cost of reinstallation. I crossed my arms. We'll see. She left and I went back inside to research Brightline Energy. Turns out they had a partnership program with HOAs where the association would get a percentage of the energy savings generated by the solar arrays. The homeowners would pay for installation and the HOA would profit from the energy credits sold back to the grid. I called Seth. They're running a profit scheme. The HOA is getting kickbacks from the energy generated on our roofs and we're footing the bill. He swore under his breath. That's a conflict of interest. If they didn't disclose that, it's fraud. The hearing was set for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, I kept digging. I found out that Angela's brother-in-law was a regional manager at Brightline Energy. I found emails obtained through a public records request showing that Angela had pushed the solar initiative through without a full membership vote. Only the 5-member board had voted and 3 of them had financial ties to Brightline. Seth presented everything at the hearing. The judge didn't look pleased. Ms. Ruiz, did you disclose your familial relationship with Brightline Energy when proposing this initiative? Angela shifted in her seat. It wasn't relevant. The project benefits the community. The judge flipped through the documents. It appears the community was never given the option to vote. The board acted unilaterally and homeowners were charged without consent. That's within our authority under the charter. Not when it involves structural modifications to private property, the judge said, and certainly not when there's an undisclosed financial interest. The injunction was made permanent. All installations were halted and the judge ordered a full refund of any fees collected, but I wasn't done. Because while the installations were halted, 9 houses, including a few that weren't part of my initial survey, already had panels. And those panels were generating power. I started monitoring my neighbors' systems. The energy wasn't going to their homes. It was being fed directly into the grid and the credits were going to an account controlled by the HOA. Seth filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of all affected homeowners. We weren't just seeking refunds. We were claiming ownership of the energy profits generated by panels installed on our property without consent. The case took 4 months to move through the system. During that time, Angela tried to rally support, but most of the community had turned against her. A recall petition was filed and she was removed as president. The new board, led by a retired engineer named Tom Briggs, immediately cooperated with the lawsuit. They handed over all financial records, including a spreadsheet showing that the HOA had collected over $47,000 in energy credits over the past year. The settlement was reached in mediation. Every homeowner who had panels installed without written consent would receive a full refund of the installation fees, plus their share of the energy profits generated to date. Additionally, they would retain ownership of the panels, and any future energy credits would go directly to them, not the HOA. For me, that meant a check for $4,200 plus $1,800 in energy profit share, and I got to keep the panels. But the real victory was watching Angela and the other board members face consequences. The state attorney general opened an investigation into the financial relationships between the board and Brightline Energy. Angela was fined $15,000 for breach of fiduciary duty and barred from serving on any HOA board in the state. Her brother-in-law was fired from Brightline, and the company lost its contract with Maple Ridge. I spent the next few weeks working with Tom and the new board to draft updated HOA guidelines. We implemented a rule requiring a full membership vote for any project exceeding $1,000 per household and mandatory disclosure of any financial relationships between board members and contractors. We also set up a community fund where a portion of the energy credits from those who opted to keep their panels would go toward neighborhood improvements like park maintenance and street lighting. One evening, I was sitting on my porch when Mrs. Chen walked over with a plate of dumplings. She smiled and handed them to me. "Thank you for fighting this. We didn't think we could." "You could have," I said. "You just needed someone to start." She nodded and headed back home. I looked up at the solar panels on my roof, the ones I never asked for but now owned. They were humming quietly, converting sunlight into energy, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like the system had actually worked. Not because it was designed to, but because enough people refused to let it steamroll them. The following month, I received my first energy credit payment directly from the utility company. It wasn't much, maybe $80, but it was mine. No HOA middleman, no shady contracts, just clean energy from my roof going back into the grid and money going into my account. I framed the settlement agreement and hung it in my office, right next to my property deed. Not because I was proud of the fight, but because I wanted to remember what it felt like to stand my ground when someone tried to take what was mine. A few weeks later, I got a call from a reporter at the local news station. She'd heard about the case and wanted to do a story on HOA overreach. I agreed to an interview and the segment aired during the evening news. The response was overwhelming. I got emails from people across the state dealing with similar issues. Some had HOAs installing fences, repaving driveways, or even replacing roofs without consent, then billing homeowners after the fact. I forwarded every message to Seth and he started building a database of complaints. Within 6 months, a state legislator introduced a bill to reform HOA governance, requiring explicit homeowner consent for any property modification and mandating financial transparency for all board members. The bill passed and it was nicknamed the Holt Act. I didn't ask for that, but I wasn't going to argue. Change doesn't happen because systems are fair. It happens because people get fed up and push back. As for Angela, I heard through the grapevine that she moved to another state. No forwarding address, no goodbye, just gone, good riddance. Tom Briggs turned out to be a solid HOA president. He ran the board like a democracy, not a dictatorship, and for the first time in years, people actually showed up to meetings. I even started attending occasionally just to keep an eye on things. One evening after a meeting, Tom pulled me aside. "You know," he said, "most people would have just paid the fee and moved on." I shrugged. "Most people didn't have a lawyer for a friend." He laughed. "Fair enough. But still, you did something here. You reminded people they have rights." I didn't have a response to that, so I just nodded and headed home. The solar panels are still on my roof. They're still generating power and I'm still getting paid for it. Every time I see that credit on my utility bill, I think about Angela's face in that courtroom when the judge ruled against her. I think about the neighbors who didn't think they had a choice. And I think about my house, my property, my roof. Because at the end of the day, that's what this was about. Not solar panels or energy credits or HOA politics. It was about the line between what's yours and what someone else thinks they can take. And I'll be damned if I let anyone cross that line without a fight. The panels hum quietly above me as I sit on the porch, the sun setting over Maple Ridge. Somewhere in the distance, I hear kids playing in the park, the one we're now funding with clean energy. It's not a perfect ending, but it's an honest one. And sometimes that's enough.